Today's video is all about retiring in Vancouver, something that I'm very much looking forward to, but it's a little ways off for me still. For you, it might just be around the corner. In that case, this video is made just for you. We're gonna start with the pros and the cons of retiring in Vancouver. Then I'm gonna get into what parts of Vancouver are ideal for retirement living. And finally, I'm gonna share some tips with you. These tips you're gonna wanna stick around for right till the end, because this is gonna help ease your move and your transition to Vancouver for retirement. Let's get into it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team. And on this channel, we do nothing but talk about living in and moving to Vancouver. In today's video, we're specifically discussing retiring in Vancouver. And in fact, Vancouver is one of the best destinations in all of Canada for retirement. We were rated recently, 2022, as the top retirement destination in the Americas. Not just Canada, not just British Columbia, not just North America, but South America as well. And on a global scale, we're considered one of the top retirement destinations. So why is that? Let's get into the pros. Pro number one is our healthcare system. And when you're approaching retirement age, as we get older, we're all concerned with our individual health and our access to good healthcare. It is definitely one of the big drivers for people to be drawn to Vancouver. Even if you want to be in British Columbia, the best healthcare that you're gonna find, the best access to healthcare is in Vancouver. We have two major hospitals in the city of Vancouver. We have an additional one that is currently being constructed, and many of the suburbs have their own hospitals as well. So healthcare is one of those things that a lot of people are going to be drawn to Vancouver. And if you're retiring, if you end up in outlying communities for serious complications, people have to be sent into Vancouver. And so one of the big benefits if you live in the city of Vancouver is that there's no delay in access to the quality of healthcare that you need when there's an emergency. Pro number two is the weather. Now, specifically in comparison to the rest of Canada, Vancouver has one of the most mild climates. For the big cities in Canada, it has the mildest climate in the entire country. And so you find that our summers are not incredibly hot. They do get warm and enjoyable and pleasant, but they're not overwhelmingly hot as they can be in some other parts of the country. And then our winter weather also is not an extreme. We also don't have what is sort of stereotypical for the rest of Canada. We don't have a lot of snow. We don't have incredibly freezing temperatures, -30, -40, enormous wind chill factors. It's a relatively mild winter. And for the most part, we don't get a lot of snow at all. And so there's a lot of people that get drawn to Vancouver because of our weather. And in fact, if you want more details about weather, I have done a video all about Vancouver's weather, which I'll link right here for you so you can get some more details all about weather in Vancouver. And pro number two would be the access to the outdoors. I think a lot of people, as we get older, we prioritize our health and our fitness. And if you want access to the outdoors, there's really no better place than Vancouver. And it's not just the city of Vancouver, it's also the suburbs. Most of the suburbs, including Vancouver, have an excellent park network, local neighborhood parks, and typically a few larger big parks, places like Stanley Park in Vancouver or Central Park in Burnaby. And on top of that, then just outside of the metro area, there's immense access to wilderness. And I talked about it in a number of videos, but really within about half an hour of being in the center of the city, you can be in complete and utter wilderness in the mountains and have access to that type of thing, whether it's the mountains, the rivers, or the ocean. Whatever it is that you want to do with your time, you can find it in Metro Vancouver. So one of the other big pros of living in Vancouver and retiring to Vancouver is the air quality and the water quality, in fact. So air quality is something I find people are really surprised by when they arrive in Vancouver. It's something that you don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to, but I think as we're getting older and a little more aware of our health and our fitness, it becomes a much bigger deal. There's few places in North America that have better air quality than Vancouver does. That access to the outdoors, and then also being right on the ocean. And we have typically a breeze that's coming off the ocean. And if there is any issue with air quality in the city, it's sort of, unfortunately for people to the east of us, it gets pushed out from Vancouver. The result is air quality is impeccable almost all the time in Vancouver, with the exception of some forest fire periods when it's incredibly hot and there's some forest fires in other parts of British Columbia. There have been in recent years a couple weeks in the summer months where there's a bit of an issue around air quality, but for the most part, in comparison to many other parts of North America, air quality is immaculate. And then water quality, the water in Vancouver, again, something that I talk about in other videos, is next to none. And the quality of what comes out of our taps is incredible. It is delicious water. It is incredibly soft. You don't taste any metals in our water. It gets to the point where I don't understand personally why people would buy bottled water. Unlike some other parts of around the world where you have to worry about the quality of the water that you're getting and also in the taste of the water that you're getting out of the tap. And in Vancouver's water is next to none. It's one of the best in the world. Cultural attractions are another thing that draws a lot of people to Vancouver. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Vancouver is not New York City or Toronto or Boston. So we don't have the scale of people here. I mean, it's a metropolitan area that has about 3 million people, but it doesn't have 10 million or 20 million people. So obviously what's culturally available does not compare to much bigger cities. But for people in Canada, this is one of the areas in Canada that has a cultural draw. It's got the sports that you want to watch. It's got the concerts coming to town. There are museums. There are lots of festivals happening. There is something always going on, and especially in the summer months. So you're not going to be bored, and there's going to be something to entertain you throughout the year. So culturally, this is a destination for people thinking of retiring. And pro number 6 is the ease of traveling. Vancouver is incredibly well connected internationally. So if you are, when you retire, you're not just going to be stay in one location. If you want to travel the world, Vancouver is one of those cities that gives you access to the world quite easily. It has an international airport, considered to be one of the best in the world. It is one of the busiest in Canada, and it has access whether you're going to Asia or South America or to Europe or wherever you may want to travel. Direct flights leave from Vancouver regularly. Now, on top of that international travel access, you also have access to fantastic traveling options sort of on a closer neighborly basis. So whether that is going up to the Okanagan, to the north to an area like Whistler, over to Vancouver Island, or the Gulf Islands that are between Vancouver and Vancouver Island, or south of the border, and going to places like San Francisco or Seattle or Portland. All of these are very easily accessible from Vancouver and make traveling from Vancouver really, really easy. Another significant pro of living in Vancouver is that it's safe. You do not need to worry about your safety when you're living in Vancouver. And this comes out in crime statistics. We're sort of on par, a little bit below average for Canada in terms of overall crime, but we're well below crime on the crime severity index. So we do have some issues with crime, specifically in very certain areas of the city with petty crime. So things like having a car broken into to get change stolen or a bag taken out of your car, having a bike stolen. These things happen fairly regularly, but there's very little violent crime in Vancouver in comparison to the size of the city and in comparison to what happens in the rest of Canada. And then obviously Canada is a relatively safe country. And so in comparison to the globe, to North America, Vancouver is incredibly safe. And that's another reason that people feel very comfortable retiring to Vancouver. Finally, one of the biggest pros of living in Vancouver is its walkability and the ease of access of transportation throughout Metro Vancouver. It's unlike most cities in North America, the degree to which Vancouver is walkable for its size. It's a relatively small city, which makes it increasingly walkable, but on top of that, we have excellent infrastructure for alternatives to driving. Predominantly, that is led by our transit system and the SkyTrain or the West Coast Express if you live in further distant suburbs. But you don't just have to live in downtown Vancouver not to have a car. You could live in Burnaby or in Surrey or in Coquitlam and have very easy access to alternative modes of transportation. Those alternative modes include, aside from taxis, obviously, like things like Uber, car shares like Evo here in Vancouver, or bike shares and our cycling network. But there's a phenomenal transportation network throughout Metro Vancouver that a lot of people, when they move here, they realize they don't actually need a car. And that can save you a lot of money when it comes to you and your retirement. All right, so now we're gonna get into the cons of retiring in Vancouver. The ratio of pros to cons is skewed quite a bit to the pro side. I had 8 pros and I could only come up with 3 cons. Number 1, would be access to doctors. Finding a family doctor in Vancouver can be a bit of a struggle, and that's something that a lot of people are concerned about when they're thinking of retiring. So as you recall, when we were talking about the pros in Vancouver, one of them was healthcare. And in the grand scheme of things, our healthcare system is excellent, but we do struggle in Vancouver with the number of doctors, family doctors, general practitioners that are in the city. And so they can be at a premium. They can be very difficult to nail down and find. And that is something that could be considered a con of living here. Now, having said that, I mean, I don't know anybody who really tries to find a doctor who doesn't end up finding a doctor. And it is easier outside of the city of Vancouver in the suburbs than it is in the city of Vancouver. Predominantly, the reason I think that we tend not to have GPs in the city of Vancouver is that it has become a very expensive city to live in. And so those doctors are finding, well, I can make just as much money in the outlying areas where housing is much less expensive. So they move into those areas. In any case, finding a doctor in Vancouver is one of those cons of retiring. Con number 2 would be the weather. And again, this is one of those pros because it really is kind of dependent on where you're coming from. But Vancouver winters in particular can be wet and cold. They're not as cold as much of the rest of Canada, and they can be equally as wet as sort of East Coast winters. But if you're coming from the prairies, you're used to a much drier winter with a lot more sun. Vancouver doesn't have a lot of sun in the winter months or a lot of dry spells. There's a lot of rain. But if you've been checking out some of my other videos, you would know that it really does depend on where exactly in Metro Vancouver you live. And there are areas like to the north and to the east generally where we see a lot more rain in the winter months. And then to the south, we typically see a lot less. And so if weather is an important factor for you, you can sort of find within the Metro Vancouver area certain parts that are going to better suit you. And the final con of retiring to Vancouver is the most obvious one, and that would be the cost of housing. Cost of living is pretty equal to the rest of Canada. There's not enormous differences. There's some things that are cheaper in Vancouver and some things that are more expensive. But the biggest gap that you're going to see between living just about anywhere in Canada other than Toronto would be the cost of housing. And that's something that a lot of people that are considering Vancouver as a retirement option really struggle with. But you do want to keep in mind that where you live in Vancouver really does play an enormous role. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. And it is something that obviously I, as a real estate agent, can help you with. And if you are thinking of moving to Vancouver for retirement and purchasing a home, be sure to reach out. My contact information is right there on the screen. I helped hundreds of people move to Vancouver, and I can help you as well and pinpoint, based on your budget, where might be the best option for you to move. But there is significant variation in the valuations around Metro Vancouver. And there can be areas that are just going to be prohibitively expensive for you based on your budget. But more than likely, there's also going to be some cost-effective value in Vancouver for just about any budget. If you are getting value out of this video, I'd really appreciate you hitting that like button and smash the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this one, all about living in and moving to Vancouver. I put out videos like this every single week. You don't want to miss a single one. Now let's get back to the video. So speaking of the areas, the best areas and the differences in costs, we're going to get into that in the next section. So what are the best areas of Metro Vancouver to retire to? I'm going to talk about my 4 favorite areas in Metro Vancouver. And we're going to go from no particular order, but I'm going to save my favorite to the very last. Number 1 is the West End of Vancouver. Now, this isn't the West Side or Vancouver West or West Vancouver. This is the West End. It's the western side, the western half of the downtown Vancouver Peninsula. And for such a fantastic location, it's sandwiched between downtown Vancouver and Stanley Park. You have ocean and water at your doorstep. You have beaches. You have fantastic community amenities like libraries and community centers and pools and recreation. And you also have a relatively affordable price point. The West End is one of Vancouver's densest populated areas. It used to be a beach community, but today it's become filled with tall skyscrapers, high density population. So the result is in that area, you're not going to find houses. Most likely, you're not going to find half duplexes either. And most likely you're not going to find even townhouses. There are townhouses in the area, but most people in the area live in apartments. And the typical apartment in the West End of Vancouver in February of 2024 is currently $650,200. And so I find it's one of the best values in all of Metro Vancouver, and especially if you want to be in an urban center surrounded by options. That is the place that I would really think about if I'm retiring to Vancouver. And my favorite part of the West End is actually the area west of Denman. Every time that I go into that area, every time that I am west of Denman, between Denman and Stanley Park, I feel like I'm on vacation. It's just a different feel of the city. Everybody's a little more relaxed. There's just a retirement vibe to the community. There's even palm trees. I mean, it feels like you're in LA to some degree. I mean, that is if it's a little bit warmer, but it can feel like you're in LA. It's just vacation type of vibe. Next, we're looking at Kerrisdale. Kerrisdale is a community on the west side of Vancouver, so no longer the West End, but now we're talking about the west side of Vancouver. This is an area actually that I grew up in, where I spent my childhood. It is also a very popular place for retirees. It has some higher density apartment buildings that were built in the apartment buildings might have been built in the 70s, early 70s. And then the condo buildings were built starting in the late 70s, 80s through to today. And it is generally sort of a higher income neighborhood, but the great thing is that some of these older buildings are actually excellent values. So you are living in a very high income area, not necessarily paying through the nose for that privilege. And because there is an older population in the area, and there has been for decades, like when I was a kid, it was that way. I remember delivering newspapers to those apartment buildings, and many of the people I was delivering newspapers to felt like they were ancient to me at the time as a 12-year-old or whatever. They would love having this cute little kid delivering newspapers and say hello, bake cookies for them or whatever. Anyways, I digress. But Kerrisdale is a fantastic place to retire to because it has sort of this variety of options from more affordable to extreme luxury. But because of that older demographic, there's also a lot of shops and services that sort of cater to that demographic. So there is shopping nearby, there's a community center, there's a library, there's a pool. All the shopping that you could want is very walkable within just a few minutes in what is known as Kerrisdale Village. I think Kerrisdale is one of those great little pockets to target if you're thinking of retiring in Vancouver. The typical condo in Kerrisdale in February 2024 is going for $1,069,500. Now keep in mind that's taking into account some of the better value places and the more luxurious places. And then if you're thinking of a detached house, that is an option in this neighborhood, but they are considerably more expensive. And you're looking at $3,541,100 for a typical house right now in Kerrisdale. And third, if money is no real object, I would recommend looking at West Vancouver. Traditionally, West Vancouver was one of those parts of Metro Vancouver that people would retire to, but it's become quite luxurious and quite expensive. And so it's not an option for everyone, obviously, but the properties are a little more spread out. You're a little more secluded. West Vancouver is just outside of the city of Vancouver. It's basically just over the Lionsgate Bridge and to the west. It's nestled up on the North Shore Mountains. And so you have really easy access to the ferry from Horseshoe Bay, and also going up to do some skiing at Whistler or Blackcomb. And then also getting into the city could take you just about 15 minutes on a perfect traffic day. On a bad day, you do get stuck with the bridge, but that's one of the things that people in West Vancouver don't really mind. They prefer to be a little more removed from the city. So West Vancouver is definitely an area that you might want to think about if you're coming to Vancouver with a significant amount of equity. And just how much? Well, let me tell you. Condos, there's not a lot of them, but the typical condo in West Vancouver is $1,339,900. And again, in West Vancouver, there are some better value options with some buildings that are considerably older, built in the 70s, versus a lot of very highly luxurious buildings that have been built more recently. And that's where the typical price is sort of edging upwards. And for a house, it's actually lower than Kerrisdale. But in Kerrisdale, we were just looking at a very small community, where in West Vancouver, we're looking at the entire city. And that includes some areas with higher density, smaller lots, and some areas, you can be looking at a house in West Vancouver that might run about $2.5 to $3 million, but you're also looking at an area where houses could cost 20, 30, $40 million. So a typical house in West Vancouver right now is $3,076,200. I'd be thinking about West Vancouver if I was retiring in Vancouver and I had the equity to be able to make that happen. And finally, our tour of retirement areas in Metro Vancouver ends with what I think is the best location in Metro Vancouver, and that is White Rock for retirement. And White Rock is one of those areas, it's kind of special. It's one of those, it really stands out as a separate community in all of Metro Vancouver. And a lot of people have very positive connections with White Rock, as I do. It's sort of traditionally a beachside community. It is to the far south of Vancouver. And if you recall when we were talking about weather, what that means is the weather in White Rock is some of the best that you're gonna find in Metro Vancouver. The amount of rain they get in White Rock is about just shy of a third of what you can get in the worst parts of North Vancouver. So well under 1,000 millimeters of rain a year. And they're also a lot sunnier. So there's an area down there where, you know, if it's raining in North Vancouver and you look to the south, you can see a band of light. That's typically White Rock, where there's no clouds and it's actually sunny. And it is right on the water, so you have really nice beach access. There's a great walking path along the beach, and then there's a pier, and there's lots of cute little restaurants and cafes in that area. There's enormous amounts of development that are happening in White Rock, and it is changing. So there's a lot of older buildings that are quite affordable, but there's also quite a bit of new product that's being built maybe in the last 5 years or so and kind of changing that. But you are gonna find a lot of options that are a broad range, from older buildings where there's excellent value to where there's condos and townhouses and half duplexes, but even houses in White Rock. Prices are lowest in White Rock in comparison to all the other areas I'm talking about. And condos, your typical condo in White Rock in February of 2024 is $580,400. And then if you're looking at a house, it's $1,839,600. So those options are considerably less expensive. You're looking at about half the cost of a house and condo in Kerrisdale. Now, the drawback of being in White Rock is it is on a considerable slope, especially the beach, and that's not gonna be ideal for retirees. And also its access to transportation isn't as good as it would be in Vancouver, because you are sort of in a further distant suburb and you are about 45 minutes south of Vancouver. So it's a little harder, a little more distant to get into the city, but it's still accessible and it's still a fantastic place to live. If I was finding a place to retire in Vancouver and moving from somewhere else, I'd give White Rock a real hard think. All right, so now let's get into some of the tips I have for you if you're thinking of retiring in Vancouver, in Metro Vancouver, I should say. Number one is do not buy a place with stairs. I am shocked at the number of people who are in retirement or approaching a retirement age, and they're telling me that they're looking for their, this is their last purchase. This is the last place that they want to move into, they want to settle into as they get older. Well, one of the realities of getting older is that mobility starts to be an issue. And if you buy a place with stairs, my concern is you're not going to be able to stay there for as long as you think. And that might not be for all of us, but one of the realities of life, I think, is we really don't know what the future holds. So really think twice about buying a place with stairs. But I think some of the best options for most people are going to be a home that's on a single level. And the thing about buying a house on a single level in Metro Vancouver, that is incredibly rare. In a place where land is so valuable, a single level home, a single family house, I should say, is sort of a piece of a bygone era. And if they exist, they tend to be bought and torn down. So a higher density home can be built in its place. So keep that in mind. Most likely, if you are looking for a single family home, what you're going to be looking at is a condo. And what those condos might cost varies considerably from one part of Metro Vancouver to another. How big those homes are can really vary, but you can buy pretty sizable condos in Vancouver that I think are gonna suit you if you're thinking of retiring here. Now, what about retirement communities? It feels to me like there's parts of North America where retirement communities are a thing. That's not really the case in Metro Vancouver. We do have buildings that cater to people of a certain age. And if you're looking for assisted living as an example, there's actually condos in Metro Vancouver that you can purchase And then you pay a service agreement, a monthly fee, to have a level of support that might be suitable for you. And it can be very, very limited, like they might just come in and clean your room, and there might be a meal plan because they might have a restaurant in the building. But it could also be to a more extreme level as you age. So it's sort of a great place to age in place. And they would have nursing care, as an example, available at a more significant expense, of course. So that is one type of living that you might find suitable for aging in place. But one thing to note is that there are no buildings that exclusively cater to retirees, no condominium buildings. That's something that the British Columbia government basically banned about a year ago. So it used to be that many buildings, or a few buildings, would have age restrictions in place, and they could be whatever the group of owners decided together. And it could be 19 years, it could be 21 years, it could be 45, 65, you get the idea. The government stepped in and said, we can't do this anymore. There's only going to be one age limit that we're going to allow. And now in BC, that age limit is 55 plus. The other difference is previously all the people in that property needed to be that age. So if it was a 21 plus building, it meant anybody couldn't have children in that property. And if you were a couple that owned in that building and you ended up having kids, it meant you had to leave. The government decided that that wasn't fair. And so now the age restriction that is allowed is 55 plus, but only one person, one resident in that property needs to be 55. So you could be a 55-year-old living in that home with your 15-year-old kid or your 25-year-old or spouse, not judging, but that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at what's appropriate and what are the options for retiring in Vancouver. Now, of course, there are also assisted living options in Vancouver as you do age, and where you're paying sort of a monthly fee for the care that you're being provided and for the privilege to be able to live in those homes. And those are scattered throughout Metro Vancouver, but you are going to find them in some of the areas that I mentioned, specifically Kerrisdale and White Rock as examples. Those are areas where there are a few more because there is sort of an older demographic in those neighborhoods. And finally, one other tip that I have for you, something that a lot of people aren't aware of, is that in BC, you're allowed to defer your property taxes. So if you are 55 years of age and older, and you own your principal residence and you have at least 25% of equity based on the assessed value of your home, then the province is going to allow you to defer your property taxes indefinitely. And so a lot of people, as they age and they're looking at their budget, see this as an opportunity to push off the expense of property taxes. Now, this isn't free. You do have to pay interest to the government on the amount that you're deferring. Currently, that interest is 4.95%. I believe it does adjust based on what's happening sort of with interest rates. But now, right now, it's about 5%. Just to be clear, you would be able to defer your taxes basically until your property changes hands. So until you're no longer the owner, until the estate needs to disperse the home in order to collect the money. At that point, the property taxes have to be paid off. Again, that is something that is an advantage of being a little bit older, especially if you are on a budget, then you don't really need to worry about those property taxes. So we went through all the pros and the cons. We talked about some of the best areas in Metro Vancouver to live in when you're retiring, and I gave you some bonus tips if you are thinking of moving here and retiring. I hope that really helped you. I hope you got value out of that video. And if you did, be sure to hit the like button, smash the subscribe button to see more videos just like this one about moving to and living in Vancouver. And be sure to comment down below if you are thinking of retiring here in Vancouver. Let me know where you're moving from and where you're thinking of moving to in Metro Vancouver. I'd love to hear from you. And if you are thinking of doing that move, be sure to reach out to me. My contact information is right there on the screen. I can help you make that move to Vancouver. Whenever is convenient for you, reach out anytime. Now, I really do appreciate you watching this video all the way to the end. If you do want to check out some more videos, I have dozens of videos about living in Metro Vancouver, but I do think there's a couple here that you're really going to enjoy. This is the one that I did just last week. And then this playlist right here is all about the best neighborhoods in Vancouver to live. Be sure to check both those out, and I'll see you on next week's video.